All right, folks, welcome back. This is session 3, and we are in part 2 of answering the question, what is the gospel? I want to remind you of our definition from our last time that we met. It was this: the gospel is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. And in that session, we just knocked out a couple of things. We were reminded that faith is a knowledge-based trust. Then we brought up 2 questions that kind of come from that definition. Number 1 is, what are we being saved from? And the answer to that is that we're being saved from the curse of sin, which causes separation from God's peace, His hope, His fellowship, both in this life and in eternity. And then we kind of teased the second question, what do I need to believe? Finally, we talked about how we cannot save ourselves, and that Jesus has to come in and do something for us, and that this gift of salvation is a gift. We do not work for it. It is something that is not earned, but it is received through faith. And so now, with that definition of faith, a knowledge-based trust, we want to talk about the knowledge part of the gospel. Basically, we want to answer the question, what do I need to believe? And so we have one passage basically that we're going to look at. And from this one passage, there's going to be 5 key points that we feel like are central to having saving faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Number 1 is Romans 10, 9, and 10. It says this: because if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. For with the heart one believes and is justified, and with the mouth one confesses and is saved. Here Paul just lays out salvation in really, really simple terms. He's like, guys, look, if you want salvation, you got to confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you got to believe it in your heart. You got to have this faith, this knowledge-based trust that God raised him from the dead. And if you have that, you will be saved if you put your life into these things, because it's a knowledge-based trust. Like, it can't just be about knowing the right stuff, but knowing the right stuff is important at the same time. It can't be only about that, but it is important. And so in these 2 verses, we see 4 things really, and a 5th thing that is going to be kind of reiterated. And I want to just walk through these things. Number 1, what we see in this passage is Jesus is Lord. Jesus is Lord. Why do we bring that up? Because the passage literally says that. If we confess with our mouth that Jesus is Lord, we have to understand that Jesus was not just a person, that Jesus was not just a prophet, as some other world religions believe. He wasn't just some good guy that went around helping sick people and homeless people and broken people and hurting people and things like that. That Jesus actually is God incarnate, that he became flesh and he dwelt among us for 30-something odd years, 33 years. And in that time period, he revealed the fullness of God's character by coming and walking among us as a human. Jesus is Lord. He's not just a guy. He's not just our friend. And he's not just some historical figure. He actually is Lord. He is God. The second thing that we see from this passage is that Jesus was here. Now, we've already kind of addressed this, but here's the deal. If you are going to be raised from the dead, you have to die first. And if you're going to die, if you had the ability to die, you actually have to be here. You have to be born. You have to be a person. Spiritual beings don't necessarily have that ability to just, boom, be dead and stuff like that. So he had to enter into this physical world in a physical body. Jesus actually was here. There was a person named Jesus 2,000 years ago. And I want to be very clear on this. There are some skeptics who try to say that they're not even sure if Jesus Christ actually existed. And that is pretty crazy, actually, considering how the entire calendar and how we date things. So let's just talk about how we date things. The year is 2025. The year is 2025 because a lot of experts at some point in time dated the birth of Christ to 2025 years ago. Literally, how we date things revolves around his birth. Let's think about our calendar. What are the biggest holidays in the year? You have Christmas, celebrated all over the globe. It's a global holiday. And what is it about? It's about the coming of Christ Christ into this world. You have Easter, his death and resurrection. You have other major holidays that some are celebrated more locally and some are still celebrated globally that revolve around the life of Jesus Christ. And furthermore, we know from history outside of the Bible that there was a guy named Jesus from Nazareth that had a ministry in Israel around the turn of the millennia 2,000 years ago. So like just the idea that Jesus was not a real person, that just doesn't hold a lot of water. But it is important for us to understand that Jesus was here. Now, here's where it becomes really important for us. We as Christians, it's not just a cool thing that there was a guy named Jesus, but we actually have to believe that God became flesh, that God the Son became flesh so that he could carry our burdens and bring healing to us from that curse of sin that we talked about in our last session. The third thing that we see from this passage is that Jesus died. Yes, again, I know kind of self-explanatory here, but if you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, in order to be raised from the dead, you must first die. We need to believe that Jesus died, but along with that belief, we need to understand that with that death, there was something called the Great Exchange that took place. The Great Exchange comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. It says, "For our sake, he made him," meaning God the Father made him, God the Son, "to be sin who knew no sin." He was perfect. "So that in him we might become the righteousness of God." Jesus took on that curse that sin gave, and in turn gave us his righteousness, his right standing before the Father. And that's this beautiful thing about his death, is that he sacrificed himself for our good, and that is a praiseworthy attribute. So don't forget, number one, we have Jesus is Lord, meaning, hey, he's not just a guy, he actually is God. Number two, Jesus was here. God became flesh. He became incarnate so that way he could bear our burdens with him on the cross. And not only did he intend to do that, but he actually fulfilled it. He bore our burdens on the cross. And Jesus died. Number three, Jesus died. Number four, Jesus rose. Why do we say Jesus rose from this passage, Romans 10, 9 and 10? Well, because it says God raised him from the dead. We need to believe that. We need to believe that death did not have power to hold Jesus in the grave. Now, here's the deal. Our faith in Jesus hinges on the resurrection. You and I, this is a non-negotiable for us. It's not just enough for us to think that God actually became flesh. It's not just enough for us to think that God actually died. We have to believe in the resurrection. Why? Because if the resurrection didn't happen, then some crazy dude that claimed to be God died 2,000 years ago and he was buried and he never came back to life. Jesus would not be God if he was killed and never came back to life. The resurrection is proof of Jesus' divinity. And so when we say that Jesus rose, we are making a statement there, a claim that Jesus is who he said that he was, which is God himself. And then the final thing that we see, the fifth thing that we see, is something that is really kind of already reiterated by saying Jesus is Lord. But I just like to add this thing in there, but it's this fifth little thing. Jesus is on the throne. Why is that important? We get that from the same part in the passage that we got Jesus is Lord from. But I just like to rephrase Jesus is Lord at the end of this to Jesus is on the throne to remind us that it's not just enough for us to be like, oh, this is cool, like God exists, but he actually is on the throne. And if we are going to have real saving faith, this knowledge-based trust, we're going to have this saving faith into him, like John 3:16 talks about, which we talked about a couple sessions ago. We actually have to have faith into Jesus Christ, who is on the throne of heaven. He is Lord over our lives, not just Lord around us. And so these five things, let's go through them one last time. Jesus is Lord. Jesus was here. He actually did become incarnate. Jesus died taking that curse of sin with him on the cross and killing it for good. Jesus rose showing that he actually was who he claimed to be. And today, Jesus is on the throne, and he will be forevermore. So, all that being said, we as a church want to confess to you, hey, these are 5 really important factors that you need to believe about Jesus if you actually are going to have saving faith, or if you actually have saving faith. We don't want to baptize you yet if there's one of these facts that we've talked about that you're really struggling with. So feel free to come and talk to us. There is good evidence to support all 5 of the things that we just talked about, and we really want to highlight those things for you and answer any questions that you may have about them. So here's some things that I want you to do this week potentially as a suggested exercise. Now remember, you got to pick one, but you don't have to pick all of them. Number 1, I want you to take some time and write down those things that you have a hard time with. Maybe it's the resurrection. Maybe you just have a hard time believing in the resurrection. Maybe it's the incarnation, that Jesus actually came and was born to a virgin. Maybe it's the idea that Jesus lived a perfect, sinless life. Maybe you're questioning, was there a guy named Jesus at all? Whatever the case may be, we want you to write down the things about Christianity. And maybe you have some prior knowledge. Maybe you're coming at this thing really fresh and you're just getting into the Bible for the first time. So maybe you don't have a ton of questions, or maybe you have all the questions in the world. Maybe you've been going to church for 20 years and there's just some things that have always kind of troubled you or whatever. We want you to write those things down. And what we would like for you to do with those things is simply take that sheet, that list, to a trusted spiritual mentor or guide. Now, here's the deal. Some of you probably have some great Christian friends. This needs to be somebody that's got some real spiritual maturity and knowledge. So if you don't feel like that is one of your friends, that's okay. Bring it to your Sunday school teacher. Bring it to myself. Bring it to Dr. Mike. Bring it to one of the other staff members that we have. If you have a spiritual mentor or guide, then maybe they can help you. But we want you to take that list of just questions, those concerns, maybe some of those doubts, and bring it to that individual and just lay them out and have a good conversation about them. And then write down the things that you've learned. And maybe you still have questions about them. That's okay. But you can continue the journey. One of the things that we know about Jesus, and this is so awesome, is that he doesn't reject people who have doubts and fears. We all have some level of doubts and fears. I do think that there are some things that we need to resolve before baptism, but there's always going to be some maybe thing in you, or maybe not always, but there's likely that you will carry some little doubt or some little fear with you for quite some time, and we always need to be working through those things. And so we want to make sure that before your baptism, you have the opportunity to work through some of that stuff with a trusted individual. Then, the second thing that we would like to potentially see as a suggested exercise for this particular session is we would like for you to take what you have seen either in this video or in the written portion that you have been given, and we just want you to put it in your own words. I know that doesn't sound like real crazy. I know that it doesn't sound real difficult, but we want to make sure that in your own words, you can describe exactly what you need to believe in when it comes to the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And maybe you add some things outside of that list of 5. That's okay. We're just trying to keep things as basic as possible. So maybe you add some things in there. We would love for you to do that. So with those 2 suggested exercises, we want to encourage you to choose one or the other, or maybe you want to do both. But with all that being said, this is the end of session 3. Can't wait to see you next time.